14 kids who mysteriously vanished during a 2007 school trip, what was discovered years later. In 2007, a school bus carrying 14 students and their teacher left for a simple field trip. It never came back. For years, the official story was a sad case of truancy, an unauthorized joyride that ended with a busload of teenage runaways. The families were told to move on. The case was slammed shut. But years later, a discovery at the bottom of a murky, forgotten swamp would prove that the only thing that had run away was the truth. This isn't just a story about a missing bus. It's about a secret that was never meant to see the light of day, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power, and the terrifying reality of what happened to those 14 kids. Section 1. The Perfect Day. The town of Northgate was a quiet, unremarkable place. It was the kind of town where everyone knew their neighbors, and the biggest news was usually the high school football team's latest game. It was a place where parents felt safe, a real slice of American suburbia. And in the spring of 2007, there was a buzz of excitement at Northgate Middle School. The annual 8th grade geology field trip was coming up, a rite of passage for the town's 14-year-olds. For the students, it meant a day of freedom, a day away from the droning bells of the classroom, a chance to explore the caves and rock formations at the nearby state park. For their teacher, Ms. Bernice Daniels, it was the highlight of her school year. Ms. Daniels wasn't just a teacher. She was an institution. She had a passion for geology that was contagious and a fierce, protective love for her students. She'd been leading this very trip for over a decade without a single problem. She was organized, meticulous, and completely beloved. Among the students was a boy named Leo Warren. Leo was a quiet kid who preferred sketching in his notebook to playing sports. He was smart, observant, and incredibly close to his mother, Denise. Denise later remembered that morning with a clarity that was just haunting. She remembered Leo triple-checking his backpack for his camera and extra batteries. He couldn't wait to photograph the stalactites in the main cavern. He hugged her goodbye on the front porch and promised to bring back a cool rock. It was a completely normal morning, the kind you don't think twice about, a morning that would become the fixed point around which the rest of her life would tragically pivot. The yellow school bus, number 7, was set to leave at 9 a.m. sharp. The driver was a familiar face, a guy who'd been with the district for years. Everything was in order. Permission slips were signed, emergency contacts were filed, and Ms. Daniels had her binder with every single detail of the day planned out. It was a perfect, ordinary day. Then, around 9:45 a.m., about an hour into the trip, parents' phones started to ping. It was a group message from Ms. Daniels with a photo attached. All 14 students were there, smiling and making goofy faces inside the bus. Ms. Daniels was in the front, giving a cheerful thumbs up. The message was simple. On our way. Everyone is excited. A few parents noticed the photo had a geotag, a pretty new feature at the time. It placed the bus about 9 miles southeast of the school, a little off the main route to the park, but nobody thought much of it. Ms. Daniels was probably taking a scenic detour to show them something cool. It was exactly the kind of thing she'd do. It was the last time any of them would ever hear from her. It was the last proof that their children were, for one last moment, still happy, still safe. Section 2. The Vanishing and the Lie. The bus was supposed to be back at 4 p.m. By 4:15, there was no sign of it. At 4:30, a small group of parents started gathering in the school parking lot, their casual chatter slowly turning into a low hum of anxiety. Denise Warren was one of them. She kept rereading that cheerful morning text from Ms. Daniels, trying to fight the sick feeling in her stomach. By 5 p.m., the anxiety had erupted into full-blown panic. Denise and a few others went to the principal's office. The principal, a man known more for pushing papers than for caring about students, seemed bizarrely dismissive. When they told him the field trip bus was missing, he just gave them a blank stare. "What field trip?" he asked. He claimed there was no geology trip on the school's official calendar. He insisted it must have been an unofficial trip, something the teacher organized on her own. He pulled up the school's digital records, and sure enough, there was nothing. No 8th grade geology trip. The parents were stunned. They had the signed permission slips at home. They had the text from the teacher on their phones. How could the school not know? The police were called, but the principal's statement had already done the damage. The official story was set within hours. This was not a school-sanctioned event. Therefore, it wasn't a missing school bus. When the parents showed the police the photo from Ms. Daniels, that geotag showing them 9 miles off course only made the police's theory stronger. This wasn't a disappearance, it was a joyride. A dedicated, loved teacher and 14 of her students had, according to the authorities, just decided to run away together. The idea was insane, a slap in the face to everyone on that bus, but it became the official story. And then, something even more chilling happened. One by one, the parents realized the photo Ms. Daniels had sent was gone. It had been remotely wiped from all of their phones. The one piece of digital proof that the trip was real, that showed their children's smiling faces, had just vanished, leaving only their frantic memories behind. No Amber Alert was ever issued. No major search was ever launched. The case was quietly closed in under 48 hours, logged as a runaway incident. The media barely touched it. A local paper ran a tiny article on page 6 about truant teens, quoting the school's official line. For the rest of the world, it was a non-story. But for the 14 families, it was the start of a nightmare. They were stonewalled by the very people supposed to protect them. Their grief was twisted with confusion and a deep, sickening sense of betrayal. The school they had trusted was now denying their children even existed. The police who were supposed to serve and protect were treating them like hysterical parents. They were utterly alone. The years that followed were a silent, agonizing wait. Section 3. The Silent Years. The official story, mass runaway, settled over Northgate like a layer of dust, uncomfortable but mostly ignored. The school administration stuck to their denial, and any parent who pushed back was met with legal threats. The pain of the 14 families became a private agony that the town seemed determined to forget. But Denise Warren refused to be silent. The first few years, she did everything she could. She printed flyers with Leo's face, taping them to telephone poles, only to find them torn down a few days later. She tried to hire a private investigator, but the cost was out of reach, and since there was no official crime, there were no real leads to chase. She wrote letters to state representatives, to news stations, to anyone she thought might listen. Most went unanswered. The few reporters who showed any interest were quickly warned off by the school district's lawyers. Denise became a tragic fixture in town. Other parents, beaten down by grief, retreated. Some moved away, unable to stand the constant reminders. But Denise stayed. She kept Leo's room exactly how he left it. His sketchbook was still open on his desk, showing a half-finished drawing of a mountain. She was living like a ghost, fueled by one single conviction: the official story was a lie. She knew her son. She knew Ms. Daniels. They would not run away. Something terrible had happened, and someone had gone to incredible lengths to cover it up. A decade passed. The world moved on. New kids walked the halls of Northgate Middle, with no idea that 14 ghosts had once sat in their seats. The story became a dark piece of local folklore, a rumor that was easier to just dismiss. The first crack in that wall of silence came from a newsroom 2 cities over. Simone Bellamy was a young, hungry investigative journalist working the night shift. One slow evening, she was digging through an online archive of cold cases, looking for a story. She stumbled on the Northgate file. It was thin, suspiciously thin for a case with 15 missing people. The runaway conclusion just felt wrong. 14 kids and a veteran teacher all vanishing together? It was too neat. Intrigued, she started making calls. Her first was to the Northgate Police Department, and she was routed to Detective Lance Morrow. Morrow was just a rookie back in 2007. He'd been on duty that night, listening to the principal's cold denial and the parents' desperate pleas. The case had always bothered him, how quickly it was shut down. It was a thorn in his conscience. When Simone Bellamy called, it was like she pressed right on that old wound. Morrow, now a seasoned detective, agreed to meet her off the record. He told her about the deleted photo, the sham of an investigation, and the principal's weird insistence the trip was fake. He also shared a detail that never made it into the file. In the days after the disappearance, the school's maintenance staff did a deep clean of the archives, shredding paper records from that year, calling it a new digitization policy. It was all technically legal, but the timing was deeply suspicious. Together, Simone and Morrow started digging. Simone filed a public records request for all of the school's trip authorizations from 2007. The district stalled, but she was relentless. Finally, they sent her a box of files. It was mostly junk, but buried at the bottom, misfiled in a folder for janitorial supplies, was a single sheet of carbon paper. It was a faint, blue copy of a field trip request form. The trip was for Ms. Bernice Daniels' 8th grade geology class. The destination was the state park. The date was the exact day they vanished. And at the bottom, in clear, unmistakable handwriting, was the signature of the very same principal who had sworn the trip never existed. It was the first solid proof that the entire official story was a deliberate lie. The lie was finally starting to unravel. Before we get to the discovery that blew this case wide open, I want to ask for your support. These stories about forgotten cases and institutional cover-ups are incredibly important to tell. If you agree, please take a second to hit the like button and subscribe. It really does help ensure that voices that have been silenced for so long are finally heard. Your support makes a huge difference. Section 4. The Discovery in the Swamp. That signed trip request was a bombshell. It proved there was a cover-up. Simone Bellamy's news outlet, smelling a huge story, gave her the green light to go all in. Detective Morrow quietly reopened the case, now able to treat it as a potential crime, not a cold runaway file. But they still had a problem. They had exposed a lie, but the real mystery remained. What happened to Bus 7? The breakthrough came from a totally unexpected place. About 30 miles southeast of Northgate, far from any real roads, lies the Greenwater Swamp. It's a dense, tangled marshland that most locals stay away from. One hot afternoon, a couple of amateur drone enthusiasts were testing out new gear, flying it over the swamp. Later, as they were reviewing the video, they saw something. In a remote corner of the swamp, half hidden by trees and a thick mat of green algae, was a flash of yellow. It was a large, rectangular shape sunk in the black water. When they zoomed in, They could just make out the curved roof and windows. It looked like a bus. They reported it to the local sheriff, who remembered the old Northgate whispers and immediately called Detective Morrow. A team was assembled the next morning. Morrow alerted Denise Warren. She stood at the edge of the swamp, her hands clenched, her heart pounding with a terrifying mix of hope and pure dread. The recovery was a slow, difficult operation. Heavy-duty winches were brought in, and thick cables were strapped to the bus's frame. For hours, the only sounds were straining engines and the sucking mud. Then, slowly, the bus began to rise from the water. It was a horrifying sight. The yellow paint was peeling and caked in a decade of rust and slime. As it was hauled onto the bank, the number on its side became visible. 7. It was them. After all these years, it was found. A forensics team moved in, their white suits bright against the dark, muddy scene. The air was thick with tension. What would they find inside? The doors were rusted shut and had to be pried open. As they groaned open, a wave of stale swamp water and air washed out. The interior was a scene of eerie preservation. Backpacks and jackets were scattered on the floor, buried in silt. A science textbook lay open on a seat, its pages fused together. Near the front, they found Ms. Daniel's red lanyard. Her smiling face on the ID card faded but still there. But the most important discovery was what they didn't find. There were no bodies. No human remains at all. The bus was completely empty. 15 people had been on this bus when it vanished, but they weren't here. This wasn't some tragic accident. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the start of a much darker one. The empty bus didn't bring closure. It only deepened the mystery. Where did the children and their teacher go? The forensics team started their work and almost immediately found things pointing not to a crash, but to a planned abduction. The bus's GPS transponder had been professionally removed. The housing was there, but the unit itself was gone, the wires clipped clean. This wasn't something a teenager would know how to do. Then they found something even more sinister. In the ceiling panels, they found residue from the ventilation system. The lab results came back positive for a powerful, fast-acting aerosolized sedative, enough to knock out everyone on the bus in minutes. The picture was becoming horribly clear. The bus hadn't crashed. It had been driven into the swamp on purpose. But first, its occupants had been drugged and then taken. Section 5. The conspiracy unveiled. The sedatives changed everything. This was officially a mass abduction case. With Simone Bellamy's reporting causing a media firestorm, a state-level task force was formed with Detective Morrow at its center. The investigation now focused on the people who had orchestrated the whole thing. Morrow and Simone went back to the beginning. The substitute driver. The forged permission slip. Who had the power to make a principal lie? To make police files vanish? To delete evidence from dozens of phones at once? It had to be someone with serious influence. They started with the last-minute substitute driver. The school's records on him were a joke. His name, they discovered, was an alias. A background check led nowhere until a forensic accountant on the task force found a payroll deposit. The money hadn't come from the school district. It came from a shell corporation called Conway and Broster Logistics. The name Broster set off alarms for Simone. Victor Broster was a titan of industry in the state, a real estate magnate with a reputation for being ruthless. He was famously private, but held huge political power through campaign donations. Publicly, he was a philanthropist. Privately, people whispered about his shadowy connections. The link was thin, but it was a start. As the team dug into Conway and Broster Logistics, They found it was a subsidiary of Braster's main corporation. Its business was listed as specialized transport, but its operations were completely opaque. The real break came from a retired customs agent. He read about the reopened case and contacted Morrow. He remembered something from years ago, a strange inspection at the border. A van from a logistics company had been stopped. Inside were over a dozen kids, all looking drowsy and out of it. The driver produced paperwork for a youth program called Nueva Futura, sending underprivileged American kids to a special camp in Mexico. The guardianship documents looked legitimate. The agent felt uneasy, but with the paperwork in order, he had no choice but to let them pass. He filed a report, but it went nowhere. The name of the logistics company? Conway and Braster. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. Nueva Futura, new future, wasn't real. It didn't exist. It was a ghost, a name on a forged document. The task force, now armed with a warrant, raided the Conway and Braster warehouse. Inside, they found a chillingly professional operation. Soundproofed holding rooms, medical supplies, including the exact same sedative found on the bus. And in a locked filing cabinet, they found the master plan. It was a human trafficking operation of unimaginable evil. For years, Victor Braster had been using his resources to abduct children, selling them to a network of wealthy clients around the world. The Northgate disappearance wasn't random. Ms. Daniels' field trip was the perfect opportunity. The children were targeted, handpicked based on client requests. The sub-driver was one of his men. The sedative was pumped through the bus's vents on that remote road. Once everyone was unconscious, they were transferred to a waiting van. The bus was then ditched in the swamp. The cover-up was just as meticulous. The school principal had been on Braster's payroll for years. Braster's political connections, a state senator he'd funded, pressured the police to close the case. A tech expert contracted by Braster deleted the photo from the parents' phones. It was a conspiracy designed to be unbreakable, and for over a decade it was. The exposure of Victor Braster's trafficking ring sent shockwaves across the country. Powerful people fell, and a dark conspiracy was dragged into the light. For the families, it was vindication. They'd been told they were crazy, that their children were runaways. Now the world knew the truth. They were stolen. Denise Warren sat in the front row of the courtroom every single day of the trial, her eyes locked on the men who had stolen her son. She watched them get convicted and sentenced to life in prison. She felt a grim satisfaction, but it was a hollow victory. Because despite all the confessions and all the evidence, no one could, or would, say where the children were. Braster's network was global and secretive. The children had been passed through countless hands, given new identities, and shipped to countries all over the world. The trail had gone cold years ago. Investigators believe that Ms. Daniels, the one adult who could have identified her students, was likely killed shortly after the abduction. The fate of the 14 children of Northgate remains unknown. The story of Bus 7 is a horrifying reminder that true evil can flourish in silence, and of how crucial it is to question the official story. The men responsible are behind bars. But for Denise Warren and the 13 other families, there is no closure. Somewhere out there, the mystery lives on, in the faces of 14 children who would now be adults, forever lost to the world they once knew. The bus has been found, but the children have not. And that is the most haunting part of this story. What you think about this story? Write in the comment your opinion. On my channel, you can watch other revenge or cheating stories. See you soon, my dear viewer.